At my son's wedding, I discovered that the only place reserved for me was a trash can with my name taped to the side. I wish I could tell you that I misunderstood what I was seeing, that there had been some innocent mistake made by a rushed wedding planner. But deep down, the moment I saw it, I knew better. My name was printed neatly on a white card. Helen Carter, mother of the groom. The card was attached to a silver trash can decorated with a small ivory ribbon that matched the wedding colors. Around me, guests mingled beneath strings of warm lights hanging from the ceiling of a beautiful vineyard reception hall just outside Nashville. Glasses clinked. Laughter drifted through the room. A jazz trio played softly near the dance floor. Everything looked elegant. Everything looked perfect, except for the fact that someone had decided that a trash can belonged where I should have been sitting. For a few seconds, I simply stood there. My hands tightened around my purse. I felt the cool air from the overhead vents brush against my face. I heard someone nearby stop talking in the middle of a sentence. Then another voice whispered something too quiet for me to understand. I didn't need to hear the words. I could feel the pity. I could feel the embarrassment spreading across the room like a stain. The wedding coordinator stood several feet away, pretending not to notice me. A young server carrying a tray of champagne glanced at the trash can, then at me, and quickly looked away. Nobody wanted to be the first person to acknowledge what was sitting in front of me. Maybe they were hoping I would laugh. Maybe they thought I would create a scene. Maybe they simply didn't know what to do. I looked around the reception hall. Every table had been carefully arranged with flowers and candles. Every guest had a proper chair. Husbands sat beside wives. Grandparents sat beside grandchildren. Friends sat beside friends. Everyone had a place. Everyone except me. My son Ethan was standing across the room near the bar. He looked handsome in his tuxedo. For a moment, I felt a familiar ache in my chest. I remembered holding him when he was a baby. I remembered helping him learn to ride a bicycle. I remembered sitting in crowded high school gymnasiums cheering louder than anyone else when his name was announced. I remembered all the years when it was just the two of us and his father trying to build a good life. Ethan glanced in my direction. Our eyes met briefly. I waited for confusion. I waited for concern. I waited for him to walk over and tell me there had been a mistake. Instead, he immediately looked away. Then he turned back toward his bride and smiled. That hurt far more than the trash can. Brittany stood beside him looking radiant in her wedding gown. Her blonde hair fell perfectly over her shoulders. Her smile was bright and effortless. If anyone had looked at her from across the room, they would have seen a charming young woman celebrating the happiest day of her life. They would never have guessed how carefully she managed appearances. Over the past 3 years, I had watched her slowly reshape my son's world. Nothing dramatic. Nothing obvious. Just small changes. Small exclusions. Small moments that left me standing a little farther away each time. Family dinners I learned about afterward. Vacation photos posted online after everyone had already returned home. Holiday plans that somehow changed at the last minute. Every time I questioned it, Ethan assured me I was imagining things. Every time I convinced myself he might be right. Standing there beside that trash can, I finally stopped making excuses. A woman I recognized from Ethan's office approached me cautiously. "Helen," she said softly, "I'm so sorry." I smiled politely. "For what?" She hesitated. Her eyes moved toward the trash can before returning to mine. "You deserve better." I thanked her and continued smiling. It surprised me how calm I felt. The humiliation was there. The disappointment was there. But underneath both emotions was something colder. Something clearer. For the first time in a very long while, I wasn't confused. I wasn't doubting myself. I wasn't searching for explanations that would make everyone's behavior seem reasonable. The truth was sitting right in front of me. Literally. I walked toward an empty chair near the back of the room and sat down. Nobody stopped me. Nobody offered an explanation. Nobody apologized. The wedding coordinator avoided my gaze whenever she passed. Brittany floated from table to table accepting compliments. Ethan laughed with his friends. The ceremony had ended less than an hour earlier, yet I already felt like an outsider observing a family that no longer included me. As speeches began, I listened quietly. Friends shared stories about the happy couple. Relatives spoke about love, loyalty, and commitment. The words echoed through the room while I stared at the candle flickering in front of me. Love, loyalty, commitment. Funny how often people celebrate those things while practicing something entirely different. Then I noticed something strange. A young woman standing near the reception entrance kept looking at me. She appeared nervous. Every few minutes, she started walking toward my table before changing her mind. Finally, she gathered her courage and approached. She couldn't have been older than 25. She wore a black staff uniform and carried a clipboard against her chest. "Mrs. Carter?" she asked quietly. "Yes." Her hands trembled slightly. "There's something I think you should know." She glanced around to make sure nobody was listening. "Not here," she whispered. "Please. After the speeches. Meet me near the service hallway." My heart remained surprisingly steady. "Why?" I asked. The young woman swallowed hard. Then she looked directly into my eyes. "Because the trash can wasn't a joke," she said. "It was ordered that way." Before I could ask another question, she turned and walked away. I watched her disappear through a side door. Across the room, Brittany raised a champagne glass and smiled as guests applauded another toast. Everyone seemed happy. Everyone seemed relaxed. Yet suddenly, the reception hall felt very different. The trash can hadn't been an accident. It hadn't been a misunderstanding. Someone had planned it. Someone had wanted me to see it. And for the first time that evening, I began to wonder what else had been happening behind my back. For the next 20 minutes, I sat quietly through the speeches and applause while my thoughts stayed fixed on the young woman with the clipboard. Every time someone laughed, every time glasses clinked together in celebration, I found myself wondering how many people in that room knew what had happened and how many simply sensed that something was wrong. The wedding reception continued exactly as it was supposed to. The bride and groom smiled for photographs. Guests filled their plates at the buffet. Children chased each other between tables. From a distance, it looked like a perfect evening. Yet underneath that polished surface, I could feel something shifting. I checked my watch twice during the speeches. The young woman had disappeared through the service hallway and had not returned. Part of me wondered whether I should simply leave. At 70 years old, I had learned that not every battle deserved my energy. There had been plenty of moments throughout my life when walking away had been the wiser choice. But something about her expression kept replaying in my mind. She had not looked nervous because she was sharing gossip. She had looked frightened. More importantly, she had looked guilty. When the final toast ended and guests began moving toward the dance floor, I stood from my chair and quietly made my way toward the side hallway. Nobody stopped me. Nobody seemed to notice. Ethan was busy greeting relatives from Brittany's side of the family. Brittany herself was surrounded by bridesmaids and photographers. I passed through a set of double doors and entered a quieter corridor lined with storage rooms and catering stations. The music from the reception hall became distant and muffled. The young woman was waiting near a rolling cart stacked with folded tablecloths. She looked relieved when she saw me approaching. "Thank you for coming," she said softly. "You said there was something I should know." She glanced over her shoulder before answering. "My name is Emily. I work for the event company." I nodded. "What happened tonight, Emily?" She took a slow breath. 3 days ago, we received the final seating chart. Your name was listed at table 1 beside the bride and groom. That did not surprise me. As the groom's mother, that was exactly where I should have been seated. "Then what changed?" I asked. Emily looked down at her clipboard. "The bride came in yesterday afternoon with a revised seating chart." I felt my stomach tighten slightly. "She changed it herself?" Emily nodded. "Personally." Neither of us spoke for several seconds. Somewhere behind the walls, the music grew louder as dancing began. "And the trash can?" I finally asked. Emily hesitated. "That was included in the instructions." The words landed harder than I expected. Not because I had not suspected the truth, but because hearing it confirmed changed everything. There was no misunderstanding left. No room for excuses. No accidental mix-up. Someone had deliberately planned every detail. Emily continued speaking carefully. "The coordinator thought it was a joke at first. We all did. But Brittany insisted. She said it was part of a family joke and that everyone involved would understand." I almost laughed at that. Family joke. There are certain phrases people use when they want to disguise cruelty as humor. That one was among the most common. "Did my son know?" I asked. Emily lowered her eyes. "I do not know. I was not present for every conversation." It was not really an answer, but I appreciated her honesty. She was telling me only what she knew. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked gently. Emily's face softened. "Because my grandmother raised me. She spent years taking care of our family. Watching what happened tonight did not feel right." Her voice wavered slightly. "I kept thinking about how she would feel standing where you stood." For a moment, neither of us spoke. I thought about my own husband, Robert. He had been gone for 4 years now. Some days the loss still surprised me. I would hear a joke and instinctively reach for my phone before remembering there was nobody to call. I would see an old movie we used to watch together and find myself smiling before the sadness arrived. Robert had always been the first person to notice when something felt wrong. He had trusted his instincts far more than I trusted mine. Looking back, I remembered several conversations we had shared about Brittany. Nothing dramatic, nothing hostile, just observations. Small concerns, little warnings that I had dismissed at the time. She always seems to be measuring people, he once told me after a family dinner. When I asked what he meant, he shrugged and changed the subject. At the time, I assumed he was being overly cautious. Now I was not so sure. Emily reached into her clipboard and carefully removed a folded sheet of paper. There is one more thing. She handed it to me. I unfolded the page. It was a printed copy of the revised seating chart. My eyes moved down the list of names until I found mine. Someone had crossed it out with a black marker. Beside it, handwritten in neat script, were 3 words. Remove. Not needed. I stared at the page. Not because the words shocked me. Somehow they did not. What shocked me was how cold they felt. How deliberate. How final. Not needed. After everything I had done for that wedding. After every check I had written. After every planning meeting. After every moment I had spent trying to help create a beautiful day for my son. Not needed. Emily watched my reaction carefully. I am sorry. I folded the paper and slipped it into my purse. Do not apologize for someone else's choices. She nodded. What are you going to do? She asked quietly. It was a reasonable question. A younger version of me might have marched directly into the reception hall demanding explanations. A younger version of me might have confronted Brittany in front of everyone. But age teaches certain lessons. One of the most valuable is that immediate reactions rarely reveal the full picture. I looked toward the doors leading back into the celebration. Right now, I said, I am going to watch. Emily frowned slightly. Watch. People reveal more when they think you know nothing. She considered that for a moment before nodding. As I turned to leave, she stopped me once more. Mrs. Carter? Yes. I do not think tonight is the whole story. I paused. What makes you say that? Emily hesitated. Because when Brittany gave us the new seating chart, she kept asking whether certain documents had arrived. A chill moved through me. What documents? Emily shook her head. I never found out, but she seemed very concerned about them. I thanked her and returned to the reception hall. The music was louder now. Guests filled the dance floor. Ethan and Brittany were smiling beneath the soft glow of the overhead lights. To everyone else, they looked like the picture of happiness. I sat quietly at my table and watched them from across the room. Earlier that evening, I believed the trash can was the insult. Now I was beginning to suspect it was only a distraction. And whatever Brittany had really been worried about had not yet revealed itself. I remained at the table for the rest of the evening, saying very little and observing far more than anyone realized. Age has a way of making people underestimate you. By the time a woman reaches 70, many assume she no longer notices details. They assume she is focused only on memories and sentiment. What they forget is that years teach observation. Years teach patience. Years teach you how to recognize patterns. As the evening unfolded, I began noticing things I had ignored for months. Brittany checked her phone constantly, not in the casual way most people do. She seemed to be waiting for something. Every few minutes, her smile would disappear for a second as she looked at the screen. Then she would force the smile back into place whenever someone approached. Twice, I saw her walk toward the reception entrance and glance outside before returning. Ethan appeared completely unaware. He spent most of the evening greeting guests, posing for photographs, and laughing with old friends. Looking at him, I saw flashes of the little boy he used to be. The child who brought me dandelions from the yard because he thought they looked beautiful. The teenager who insisted on carrying groceries because he worried I worked too hard. The young man who once promised that no matter where life took him, family would always come first. Somewhere along the way, that young man had become harder to find. I was not sure whether Brittany had changed him or whether he had simply chosen a different path on his own. The answer no longer mattered as much as it once would have. Near 9 o'clock, dinner service ended and guests began moving toward the dessert tables. I stood and slowly walked through the reception hall. Nobody stopped me. A few relatives smiled politely. Others avoided eye contact. One of my cousins squeezed my hand and whispered that I looked lovely. The kindness almost made me emotional. Not because of what she said, but because it reminded me how rare simple kindness had become that evening. As I approached one of the side hallways, I noticed two men carrying boxes toward a private conference room attached to the venue. They wore business suits rather than catering uniforms. One of them carried a leather briefcase. The sight caught my attention immediately. Weddings rarely require briefcases. Curious, I slowed my pace. The door to the conference room remained partially open. Inside, I recognized Brittany speaking with a middle-aged man I had never seen before. Her expression was tense. He handed her several documents. She flipped through them quickly before shaking her head. Even from a distance, I could see frustration on her face. Before I could move closer, the door closed. I continued walking as though I had noticed nothing. But Emily's words returned to me. Brittany had been asking about documents. Whatever those papers were, they seemed important enough to distract her from her own wedding reception. That alone told me something was wrong. I returned to my table and sat quietly. A few minutes later, my phone vibrated. The message came from a number I did not recognize. Mrs. Carter, please do not leave yet. There is someone you need to meet. No name accompanied the message. I stared at the screen. Under normal circumstances, I might have ignored it. But nothing about that evening qualified as normal. Before I could decide whether to respond, another message arrived. Your husband trusted him. He has been trying to reach you for months. My breath caught slightly. Robert. Very few people still mention my husband. Most had gradually moved on after his passing. Yet seeing those words instantly focused my attention. I typed a brief reply. Who is this? Several seconds passed before the answer arrived. Someone trying to help. Meet near the vineyard patio at 10 o'clock. Then the messages stopped. I looked toward the dance floor. Ethan and Brittany were beginning their first dance as husband and wife. Guests gathered around them smiling and recording videos with their phones. The band played a slow song. Applause filled the room. To anyone watching, it was a beautiful moment. Yet all I could think about was the growing collection of questions piling up in my mind. The seating chart, the crossed-out name, the mysterious documents, the unknown man, the text messages mentioning Robert. None of it fit together yet, but I had the unmistakable feeling that the pieces belonged to the same puzzle. As 10 o'clock approached, I slipped outside onto the vineyard patio. The night air felt cool against my skin. Rows of grapevines stretched into the darkness beyond the reception lights. Crickets chirped somewhere in the distance. For the first time all evening, the noise of the celebration faded away. I checked my watch. 10 o'clock exactly. For several moments, nobody appeared. Then I heard footsteps approaching from the far end of the patio. A tall man stepped into the light. He looked to be in his late 60s, with silver hair and a neatly pressed navy suit. The moment I saw his face, recognition hit me. Mark Reynolds, my husband's closest friend. I had not seen him in nearly 2 years. Helen, he said gently. It has been too long. I stared at him in surprise. Mark, he nodded. There was sadness in his eyes. Not pity, not sympathy. Something heavier, something more serious. He glanced toward the reception hall before returning his attention to me. Robert asked me to give you something if the time ever came. My heart began to beat faster. Mark reached inside his jacket and removed a large sealed envelope. The paper looked old, as though it had been waiting for years. He held it carefully for a moment before placing it into my hands. Written across the front in my husband's unmistakable handwriting were 4 words. For Helen, when she is ready. I looked up at Mark, searching his face for answers. But the expression I found only deepened the mystery. What is this? I asked quietly. Mark took a slow breath. Then he looked directly into my eyes and said, the reason Brittany has been searching for documents she was never supposed to find. For several seconds, I simply stared at the envelope in my hands. The sounds of the reception seemed to disappear. The music, the laughter, the conversations drifting through the open patio doors all faded into the background. All I could see was Robert's handwriting. For years had passed since I had last seen him write anything, yet I would have recognized those letters anywhere. During our 42 years together, I had seen that handwriting on birthday cards, grocery lists, anniversary notes, and countless envelopes left on the kitchen counter. Seeing it now felt like hearing his voice again after years of silence. Mark, I said quietly, what exactly is this? He looked toward the vineyard before answering. It is something Robert prepared about 6 months before he passed away. I ran my fingers across the sealed edge of the envelope. Why would Brittany be looking for it? Mark hesitated. Because she believes it contains something valuable. I looked up sharply. Does it? A faint smile crossed his face. That depends on how you define valuable. His answer only deepened my confusion. Robert never mentioned any of this. He was hoping it would never be necessary, Mark replied. He wanted your family to stay a family. He believed people would make the right choices if given the opportunity. I could not help letting out a small, bitter laugh. That sounds like him. Robert always believed the best about people. Even when others disappointed him, he continued giving them chances. Sometimes I admired that quality. Other times it frustrated me. Standing there on the patio, I wondered whether his faith in people had been misplaced. Mark leaned against the railing and folded his arms. Helen, there are things you do not know. Clearly. He nodded. Do you remember the last Christmas before Robert became ill? I thought for a moment. Of course. Do you remember Brittany asking dozens of questions about family finances? The memory surfaced immediately. At the time, I had dismissed it as curiosity. She had asked about investment accounts, property records, insurance policies, and several trusts Robert had established over the years. I remembered feeling slightly uncomfortable, but Robert had laughed it off. He said she was simply interested in financial planning. Looking back, the questions seemed far more deliberate. I remember, I admitted. That was not the first time, Mark said. Or the last. A chill settled over me. What are you saying? He took a slow breath. Robert became concerned. Concerned about what? About motive. I looked toward the reception hall. Through the windows, I could see Brittany smiling for photographs. She looked completely relaxed, completely confident. Yet according to Mark, she had spent years searching for information she was never supposed to have. Why did Robert never tell me? I asked. Mark's expression softened. Because he knew you loved your son. The answer hurt because it was true. For years, whenever someone raised concerns about Brittany, I defended her. Whenever I noticed something that felt wrong, I convinced myself I was overreacting. Whenever Robert expressed doubts, I reminded him that families were imperfect. Maybe I had wanted peace so badly that I ignored reality. Did Ethan know? I asked quietly. Mark paused before answering. I honestly do not know. Somehow that uncertainty felt worse than either possible answer. If Ethan knew, then he had chosen to participate. If he did not know, then he had allowed himself to become blind. Neither possibility brought comfort. I looked down at the envelope again. Should I open it now? Mark considered the question carefully. That depends. On what? On whether you are ready to see your family differently. His words settled heavily between us. I thought about the crossed-out name on the seating chart. Remove. Not needed. I thought about the trash can. I thought about Ethan looking away when our eyes met across the room. The painful truth was that my family already looked different. The illusion had started cracking long before tonight. Tonight had simply shattered what remained. Slowly, I broke the seal. Inside were several documents and a handwritten letter. My hands trembled slightly as I unfolded the first page. The letter began simply, My dearest Helen. Instantly, my eyes filled with tears. Robert had always started his letters that way. I swallowed hard and continued reading. If you are reading this, circumstances have forced truths into the open that I prayed would remain hidden. First, know this. None of what follows changes how much I love you. The words blurred briefly before I focused again. Robert's writing remained steady and precise. Over the next several paragraphs, he explained that he had created a private family trust years earlier. Most of the assets were not unusual. Investments, property holdings, long-term savings. But one section caught my attention immediately. Beneficiary conditions. Attached behind the letter was a legal document outlining specific requirements tied to the trust. I frowned as I read. The language was formal, but the meaning became clear. Any family member found manipulating, coercing, or intentionally isolating another beneficiary for financial gain could lose access to future distributions. I read the paragraph twice to make sure I understood it correctly. Then I looked at Mark. Robert included this. He nodded. After several conversations with attorneys, my pulse quickened. Suddenly, Emily's comments about documents made sense. Brittany had not been searching for money itself. She had been searching for information. Information that could either protect her plans or destroy them. I turned to the next page. There were notes, dates, records of meetings Robert had attended, observations he had documented privately. Nothing dramatic, nothing sensational, just careful patterns, questions Brittany had asked, situations that concerned him. moments when he believed boundaries were being tested. Robert had been paying attention all along. Why did he keep records? I asked. Because he believed facts matter more than accusations, Mark replied. He wanted evidence, not suspicion. I looked through the pages once more. Then I noticed something attached near the back. A recent legal update dated only 2 months earlier. My stomach tightened. This was amended recently. Mark nodded. By Robert's attorney before retiring. Why? His expression grew serious. Because someone requested access to information they were not entitled to receive. I stared at him. Brittany. He did not answer directly. He did not need to. At that exact moment, my phone vibrated again. A new message appeared on the screen from the same unknown number. Do not let Brittany know you have the envelope. She thinks it was destroyed years ago. Beneath the message was one final sentence. She has no idea what happens if the truth comes out. I slipped the phone back into my purse and carefully returned the documents to the envelope. For the first time that evening, I understood why Robert had trusted Mark to safeguard everything. The information inside was not merely financial. It was a map, a quiet record of choices, patterns, and intentions that stretched back years. More importantly, it explained something I had been struggling to understand ever since Brittany entered our lives. Certain people pursue opportunities. Other people pursue positions. Robert had recognized the difference long before I did. The reception continued behind us, glowing with music and celebration. Yet standing on that patio, I felt as though I were looking at 2 completely different worlds. Inside the ballroom, everyone saw a wedding. Outside, I was beginning to uncover a story that had been developing for years. Who sent the messages? I asked Mark. He shook his head slowly. I'm not sure. But if I had to guess, it is probably someone who has seen more than they were supposed to see. Someone connected to Brittany? Possibly. Neither answer was satisfying. Before I could ask another question, the patio doors opened and a burst of laughter spilled into the night air. Several guests stepped outside carrying drinks. Instinctively, Mark lowered his voice. Do not confront anyone tonight. I looked at him. You think I should pretend everything is normal? I think you should learn everything before making a move. He glanced toward the envelope. Right now, you have information. They do not know that. I hated admitting it, but he was right. If Brittany truly believed those documents had been destroyed, then revealing my knowledge too early would only give her time to adjust. I had spent years reacting emotionally whenever family tensions appeared. Perhaps it was time to do something different. Mark left shortly afterward, promising to stay available if I needed him. As he disappeared into the parking area, I remained on the patio for several minutes. The cool Tennessee air helped clear my thoughts. Then I returned to the reception hall. The atmosphere had shifted again. The dance floor was crowded. Guests were laughing, taking photographs, and enjoying desserts. Ethan looked genuinely happy. Watching him, I felt a familiar sadness. Whatever mistakes he had made, he was still my son. Part of me desperately wanted to believe he knew nothing about the seating chart. Part of me wanted to believe he had simply been blind. But another part remembered him looking away when our eyes met. That memory was harder to excuse. I quietly resumed my seat near the back of the room. A few minutes later, Brittany approached my table. It was the first time she had spoken to me all evening. Helen, she said brightly, placing a hand on my shoulder. There you are. I have barely had a chance to talk with anyone tonight. Her smile was flawless. Her tone was warm. If someone had recorded the interaction, she would have appeared to be the perfect daughter-in-law. You seem busy, I replied calmly. Wedding days tend to be that way. She laughed softly. I hope you are having a nice time. The question was almost impressive. Not because of what she said, but because of how naturally she said it. I studied her face. There was no sign of guilt, no sign of concern, only confidence. The confidence of someone who believed she controlled the narrative. It has certainly been memorable, I said. For a fraction of a second, something flickered in her eyes. Then it vanished. Good. That is wonderful. She glanced around the room before lowering her voice slightly. By the way, have you happened to speak with anyone unusual tonight? The question arrived so casually that another person might have missed its significance. But after everything I had learned, it sounded like an alarm bell. Unusual. I repeated. Anyone asking strange questions. Anyone bringing up old family matters. I smiled politely. Should I be concerned? Of course not. She laughed again. I just know weddings bring out all sorts of people. There it was. Not fear. Not panic. Reconnaissance. She was fishing for information, trying to determine whether anything had changed, whether anyone had spoken to me, whether the documents she had spent years searching for had somehow resurfaced. I kept my expression neutral. The only people I have spoken with are relatives and guests. Her shoulders relaxed slightly. The movement was subtle, but I noticed it. Good, she said. I am glad to hear that. Before leaving, she leaned closer. Family is important, Helen. Especially now. We should all focus on moving forward together. Then she walked away. I watched her cross the ballroom toward Ethan. The moment she reached him, she whispered something in his ear. He nodded. Both of them looked briefly in my direction before turning away. A year earlier, I might have ignored that exchange. Now I paid attention. About 30 minutes later, another message appeared on my phone. Same unknown number. Check the guest list. Table 12. I stared at the screen. No explanation followed. Just those 4 words. Check the guest list. Table 12. Curiosity got the better of me. I retrieved the printed seating chart from my purse and slowly unfolded it beneath the table. Most names meant nothing to me. Friends from Brittany's side. Co-workers. Distant relatives. Then I found table 12. One name immediately stood out. David Hensley. The name stirred a memory. Not a strong one, but enough to make me pause. I had seen it somewhere before. Then it clicked. One of the documents in Robert's envelope. The legal amendment dated 2 months earlier. David Hensley had signed as a witness. My pulse quickened. Why would a witness connected to Robert's trust be attending Brittany's wedding? More importantly, why had someone directed my attention toward him? I looked across the room searching for the table number. Near the far wall, beside a large floral arrangement, I finally spotted it. A man in his early 50s sat alone, nursing a cup of coffee, while everyone else celebrated around him. Unlike the other guests, he was not dancing. He was not socializing. He appeared to be waiting. Then, as though he sensed my attention, he looked directly at me. Slowly, he raised his coffee cup in a silent greeting. And in that moment, I realized I was no longer the only person at this wedding carrying secrets. For several moments, neither of us looked away. The man at table 12 held my gaze with the calm confidence of someone who already knew exactly why he was there. Then he set down his coffee cup and gave a small nod toward the empty chair across from him. It was not a command. It was an invitation. I folded the seating chart, slipped it back into my purse, and crossed the room. Around me, the celebration continued uninterrupted. Guests laughed. Music drifted through the ballroom. A group of children spun in circles near the dance floor. Yet as I approached table 12, I felt as though I were stepping into an entirely different event hidden beneath the wedding reception. Mrs. Carter, the man said as I sat down. His voice was warm but measured. Thank you for coming. Up close, he appeared older than I first thought. Perhaps mid-50s. His suit was expensive but understated. The kind of clothing worn by someone who preferred competence over attention. You seem to know who I am, I said. He smiled faintly. I know quite a bit about you. Under different circumstances, that statement might have alarmed me. Tonight, it barely registered. Too many strange things had already happened. You are David Hensley. Yes. And your name appeared in documents connected to my husband's trust. His expression suggested I had just answered a test question correctly. Then Mark found you. I leaned back slightly. You know Mark too? Very well. He glanced around the ballroom before lowering his voice. Robert trusted a small group of people. Mark was one of them. I was another. The answer explained some things while raising even more questions. What exactly was your role? David folded his hands together. For the last 7 years, I worked as an independent compliance consultant. Robert hired me after several incidents made him uncomfortable. My attention sharpened immediately. Incidents involving Brittany? He paused. Initially, no. Later, yes. Across the room, Brittany laughed at something one of her bridesmaids said. Looking at her from a distance, nobody would have guessed that half the conversations happening that night somehow revolved around her. David followed my gaze. She is very skilled. At what? Creating impressions. The simplicity of his answer struck me. Not manipulation. Not deception. Impressions. It was exactly the right word. Brittany rarely forced situations. Instead, she guided them. She shaped perceptions. She made people arrive at conclusions she wanted them to reach. Looking back, I could suddenly see dozens of examples. Family disagreements that somehow ended with her appearing reasonable. Financial discussions that gradually shifted in her favor. Social events where certain people felt included while others quietly disappeared from the guest list. None of it had seemed significant on its own. Together, the pattern looked very different. Robert noticed it early, David continued. Earlier than most people. Why did he not stop it? David gave a sad smile. Because he hoped he was wrong. That sounded exactly like my husband. And was he? David was silent for several seconds. Finally, he reached into his jacket pocket and removed a small folded document. He placed it on the table between us. Read this. I unfolded the page carefully. It was a summary report. The language was formal and professional. Yet one paragraph immediately caught my attention. Over the past 3 years, multiple inquiries have been made regarding restricted trust provisions, beneficiary conditions, and succession authority. All inquiries originated through indirect channels associated with immediate family members. My eyes moved slowly across the page. Indirect channels? David nodded. People asking questions on someone else's behalf. A chill moved through me. You are saying Brittany has been investigating the trust? For years. The certainty in his voice left little room for doubt. Why? I asked. Because she believed there was more money than anyone realized. I stared at him. Was she? Right. David smiled slightly. That depends on your definition of more. It was almost the exact answer Mark had given earlier. Apparently, everyone is speaking in riddles tonight. That is because the money itself is not the interesting part. He tapped the report. The conditions are. I thought about the clause I had read in Robert's letter. The provision regarding manipulation, coercion, and intentional isolation for financial gain. Suddenly, the seating chart felt far more significant. Not emotionally. Legally. If someone intentionally excluded another beneficiary while pursuing financial advantage, Robert's safeguards might become relevant. David seemed to read my thoughts. You are beginning to understand. The trust can be affected by behavior. Exactly. My pulse quickened. And Brittany knows that. She suspects it. Across the room, Brittany suddenly turned in our direction. For a brief moment, our eyes met. Her smile faltered. Not dramatically, just enough. Then she quickly looked away and resumed her conversation. David noticed. She was not expecting me to speak with you. She knows who you are? Unfortunately, that answer worried me more than I wanted to admit. How? David sighed. Because 6 months ago someone attempted to obtain confidential trust records through a third party. Someone meaning Brittany. I cannot legally confirm that. His careful wording confirmed everything. We sat in silence for a moment. Nearby, a server refilled water glasses. The band transitioned into another song. Everything appeared normal. Yet beneath that normality, the evening felt increasingly unstable. Finally, David leaned forward. There is one more thing you need to know. His voice had become noticeably more serious. 2 weeks ago, someone requested confirmation that the envelope Mark gave you had been destroyed. My stomach tightened instantly. Destroyed? Yes. And when they learned it was not. David looked directly into my eyes. They never learned that. A strange mixture of relief and concern washed over me. If Brittany believed the envelope was gone, then she was operating with incomplete information. That gave me an advantage. But it also meant she might continue taking risks. Mrs. Carter, David said quietly, your husband prepared those protections because he feared a future conflict. He hoped they would never be necessary. Tonight may determine whether he was right. Before I could respond, movement near the dance floor caught my attention. Ethan was searching the room. His eyes moved from table to table until they landed on me. Then they shifted to David. The expression on my son's face changed instantly. Surprise, concern, recognition, and perhaps, for the first time all evening, genuine fear. Ethan began walking toward our table immediately. He moved with the determined expression of someone trying to solve a problem before it grew larger. From across the ballroom, Brittany noticed him change direction. Her smile faded for a fraction of a second before she started moving as well. It happened quickly, but not quickly enough to escape my attention. For the first time all evening, they were reacting instead of controlling. David noticed it too. Interesting, he said quietly. What? I asked. Neither of them expected this conversation. Ethan reached us first. Mom, he said, forcing a smile. I have been looking everywhere for you. His eyes shifted toward David. Mr. Hensley. The recognition was unmistakable. David stood and offered a polite handshake. Congratulations on the wedding. Ethan accepted the handshake but seemed distracted. Thank you. Before anyone could say more, Brittany arrived beside him. Her posture remained elegant. Her smile remained perfect. Yet there was tension around her eyes that had not been there earlier. "Helen," she said warmly. "There you are. We have guests asking about you." Then she looked at David. "I did not realize you were attending." "Last-minute invitation," David replied calmly. The statement was technically true, though not in the way Brittany assumed. Her attention shifted back to me. "We are about to cut the cake. Everyone is gathering near the dance floor." I nodded politely. "Then you should not keep them waiting." For a moment, nobody moved. The silence felt strange, almost fragile. Finally, Ethan cleared his throat. "Mom, can I speak with you for a minute?" Brittany glanced at him sharply before recovering her composure. "Of course," she said. "Family should always talk." The emphasis she placed on the word family was subtle but deliberate. I stood and followed Ethan toward a quieter corner near the reception entrance. He waited until we were alone before speaking. "What are you doing?" The question surprised me. "Excuse me." "Talking with David Hensley." I studied his face carefully. Earlier I had seen concern. Now I saw something closer to anxiety. "Why does that bother you?" Ethan rubbed the back of his neck. It was a habit he had when he felt uncomfortable. He had done the same thing as a teenager whenever he was hiding a poor grade or avoiding a difficult conversation. Some habits survive adulthood. It is complicated. "Try me." He looked away briefly. "Mom, tonight is supposed to be about celebrating. And yet here we are." The words came out softer than I intended. Ethan sighed heavily. "I know things have not been perfect. That is one way to describe it." He closed his eyes for a moment. "Look, if something upset you tonight, I am sorry." I almost laughed. Not because the apology was funny, because it was incomplete. There is a difference between apologizing for harm and apologizing for someone's reaction to harm. Ethan had chosen the safer version. "Do you know what happened with the seating arrangement?" I asked quietly. His hesitation lasted less than a second, but it was enough. There was some confusion. "No." He looked at me. "Mom, do not do that." My voice remained calm. "Do not insult both of us by pretending confusion placed a trash can where your mother should have been sitting." The color drained slightly from his face. For several seconds he said nothing. That silence told me more than any explanation could have. Across the room, Brittany was watching us. She pretended to be engaged in conversation with relatives, but her attention kept returning to our corner. Ethan followed my gaze and immediately looked uncomfortable. It was supposed to be a joke. There it was. The same excuse people use when they run out of better ones. "A joke for whom?" I asked. He opened his mouth, then closed it again. "I did not think it would go that far." "But you knew." His shoulders slumped slightly. The answer was written across his face before he spoke. "Yes." Hearing it still hurt. Not because I had not already suspected the truth. Because a small part of me had continued hoping I was wrong. Ethan looked older suddenly. More tired. Less certain. Brittany said it would lighten the mood. I stared at him. Lighten the mood. Even he seemed embarrassed hearing the words aloud. "I know how it sounds." "Do you?" He looked away again. "You do not understand the pressure she has been under." "Interesting." I folded my arms. "Because all evening I have been hearing about Brittany's concerns. Brittany's stress. Brittany's plans. Yet nobody seems interested in discussing how your mother felt standing in front of that table." Ethan flinched. Just slightly. But I saw it. For a moment neither of us spoke. Then he asked the question he had really wanted to ask from the beginning. "What did David tell you?" There it was. The real source of his anxiety. Not my feelings. Not the seating arrangement. Information. I remembered Robert's letter. I remembered Mark's warning. Most of all, I remembered David's advice about allowing people to reveal themselves. "Nothing important," I said calmly. Relief flashed across Ethan's face so quickly that he could not hide it. The reaction told me everything. Before he could respond, the master of ceremonies announced that the cake cutting was about to begin. Guests began gathering near the center of the ballroom. Brittany called Ethan's name from across the room. He looked torn for a moment. Then duty pulled him back toward his bride. "We will talk later," he said. I nodded. "Perhaps." He walked away. As I watched him join Brittany near the cake table, my phone vibrated once more. Another message from the unknown number appeared on the screen. "Do not let them separate you from the envelope. The next few minutes matter more than they realize." Beneath the warning was a final sentence. "Someone is about to make a mistake." I slipped my phone back into my purse and looked toward the center of the ballroom where guests were, gathering around the wedding cake. The atmosphere remained cheerful, but something had changed beneath the surface. I could feel it. Tension moved through the room like an invisible current. Most people did not notice it because they were busy celebrating. But once you spend enough years raising children, managing households, and navigating family conflicts, you learn to recognize the moment before something shifts. Brittany stood beside Ethan with her hand resting lightly on his arm. She smiled for photographs and accepted congratulations, yet her eyes kept moving around the room. She was watching people, measuring reactions, tracking conversations. Every few minutes her gaze drifted toward me. Then she would quickly look away. The cake cutting began. Cameras flashed. Guests applauded. The bride and groom fed each other small bites of cake, while relatives laughed and cheered. I remained near the edge of the crowd, quiet, observant, patient. The unknown message continued echoing in my thoughts. Someone is about to make a mistake. I found myself wondering who. Several minutes passed. Then I saw it. Brittany stepped away from the crowd and spoke briefly with one of the wedding coordinators. The coordinator nodded and disappeared toward the reception entrance. Brittany immediately looked across the ballroom. Our eyes met. She smiled. It was the same polished smile she had worn all evening. But this time I noticed something underneath it. Urgency. The coordinator returned carrying a small stack of envelopes and folders. Brittany examined them quickly. Then she frowned. Even from across the room, I could see her frustration. Whatever she expected to find was not there. My pulse quickened. The envelope from Robert remained safely inside my purse. Brittany had no way of knowing that. Yet somehow she seemed increasingly unsettled. A few moments later, David Hensley approached me again. "You saw that?" he asked quietly. "The folders?" He nodded. "She has been checking paperwork all evening. Looking for confirmation?" "Most likely." We watched as Brittany thanked the coordinator and returned to Ethan. Her smile had returned, but it looked forced now. "How much does she know?" I asked. David considered the question carefully. Enough to be dangerous. Not enough to be comfortable. The answer stayed with me. Not enough to be comfortable. Perhaps that explained everything. For years, Brittany had been chasing information without ever obtaining certainty. Every unanswered question created another reason to keep searching, another reason to keep pushing, another reason to isolate obstacles. Suddenly, Emily's comments about the seating chart made even more sense. If Brittany viewed relationships through the lens of strategy, then humiliation became a tool. Exclusion became a tool. Distance became a tool. The realization saddened me more than it angered me. A life spent calculating every interaction sounded exhausting. The band announced a short break before the next round of dancing. Guests drifted back toward their tables. Conversations filled the room again. Then an unexpected voice spoke behind me. "Mrs. Carter?" I turned to find Emily standing there. She looked nervous. More nervous than before. "Emily." She glanced around quickly. "I think you need to see something." My attention sharpened immediately. "What happened?" "The coordinator's office." She lowered her voice. Someone was searching through the storage files. David exchanged a glance with me. "Who?" Emily swallowed hard. "The bride." The answer did not surprise me. What surprised me was how openly Emily said it. "Are you sure?" I asked. She nodded. I saw her myself. She thought everyone was busy with the cake ceremony. David frowned. Did she find what she was looking for? Emily shook her head. "I do not think so." She seemed angry when she left. We stood in silence for a moment. Around us, guests continued enjoying the reception, completely unaware of the conversations unfolding nearby. Finally, Emily looked directly at me. "There is more." My stomach tightened slightly. "Go on." I overheard part of a conversation earlier. She hesitated. The bride told someone that tonight was supposed to settle everything. David's expression darkened. "Settle what?" Emily shook her head. "I do not know. That was all I heard. Yet it was enough. Tonight was supposed to settle everything." The phrase lingered in my mind. Whatever Brittany had planned, she believed the wedding represented a turning point, a conclusion, an ending. The irony almost made me smile, because from where I stood, it felt much more like a beginning. Before anyone could say another word, a microphone squealed softly through the speakers. The master of ceremonies stepped onto the small stage. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced cheerfully, "before we continue the celebration, the bride has requested a few special words." A ripple of applause moved through the room. Brittany accepted the microphone with practiced grace. She thanked the guests, thanked her friends, thanked her family. Her voice was warm and confident. Then she began talking about new beginnings, about moving forward, about leaving the past behind. Most guests smiled and nodded. The speech sounded perfectly normal. But after everything I had learned that evening, certain phrases stood out. We all have to know when to let go of old expectations. We all have to embrace the future. Sometimes people need to understand when their role has changed. My eyes narrowed slightly. The comments were subtle enough to avoid criticism. Yet I knew exactly who they were meant for. Brittany's gaze found mine as she spoke those words. The message could not have been clearer. She believed she had already won. She believed the future belonged entirely to her. She believed the past had no voice left. The room erupted into applause when she finished. Brittany smiled. Ethan kissed her cheek. Guests raised their glasses. The celebration continued. Yet as the applause faded, I noticed something interesting. Several people were no longer watching Brittany. They were watching me. David noticed it too. The room is changing, he said quietly. I looked around. He was right. Curiosity had replaced certainty. Questions had replaced assumptions. And somewhere deep inside, I realized something important. Brittany had spent years controlling the story. Tonight, for the first time, that control was beginning to slip. As the applause faded, I remained seated and watched the room carefully. For most of the evening, I had been reacting to events as they unfolded. Now something felt different. The pieces were finally beginning to fit together. Across the ballroom, Brittany accepted compliments from guests who had no idea how much effort she had invested in controlling appearances. Ethan stood beside her, smiling when expected, nodding when appropriate, playing the role everyone wanted him to play. Yet from time to time, I caught him looking in my direction. Each glance lasted only a second, but each one seemed heavier than the last. David sat quietly beside me. Emily had returned to her duties. The band prepared for another set. Everything appeared normal. Then the master of ceremonies stepped back onto the stage. Before we continue, he announced, the groom's family would like to offer a few words. I saw surprise flash across Brittany's face. Genuine surprise. She immediately looked toward Ethan. Ethan looked equally confused. Neither of them appeared to know who had requested the microphone. For the first time all evening, Brittany seemed uncertain. The coordinator approached our table. Mrs. Carter, she said softly, this was left for you earlier. She handed me a folded note. I opened it. The handwriting was unfamiliar. Sometimes the truth only needs a voice. The microphone is waiting. I stared at the words for several seconds. Then I slowly folded the note and slipped it into my purse. David looked at me. Your decision. I thought about the evening. I thought about the seating chart, the crossed-out name, the trash can, the lies disguised as jokes, the years of quiet exclusions. Most of all, I thought about Robert. Throughout our marriage, he always believed dignity mattered more than anger. Facts mattered more than accusations. Truth mattered more than spectacle. I stood up. A few nearby guests noticed immediately. Conversations began slowing. Heads turned. The coordinator handed me the microphone. The room grew quieter with every step I took toward the stage. By the time I reached the front of the ballroom, hundreds of eyes were watching. Brittany's smile had vanished completely. Ethan looked confused, nervous, uncertain. I understood all three emotions. I felt surprisingly calm. Good evening, I said. My voice carried clearly through the speakers. I promise I will only take a moment. The room remained silent. First, I would like to congratulate Ethan and Brittany on their wedding. A wedding should be a celebration of family, commitment, and new beginnings. Several guests nodded politely. I continued. Tonight has given me a great deal to think about. Sometimes important lessons arrive when we least expect them. Brittany shifted slightly where she stood. I noticed. So did many others. Years ago, my husband taught me something valuable. He said character reveals itself most clearly when people believe nobody is paying attention. The silence deepened. At the time, I thought he was talking about business. Later I realized he was talking about life. I reached into my purse and removed the folded seating chart. Not dramatically, not angrily, simply as a matter of fact. This evening, I learned that my assigned seat was removed from the reception plan. A ripple moved through the crowd. Guests exchanged glances. Brittany's expression tightened. Ethan looked toward her, then back toward me. At first, I thought the situation was embarrassing, but now I see it differently. I paused. Because a seat can be taken away, respect cannot. Complete silence filled the ballroom. Nobody laughed. Nobody moved. I also learned something else tonight. My late husband spent years protecting the people he loved. Not with money. Not with influence. With truth. Brittany's face lost color. Only slightly. But enough. He believed families should be built on honesty. He believed relationships should never be used as tools. He believed kindness matters, especially when nobody is forcing it. I looked directly at Ethan. Your father loved you more than words can express. Ethan swallowed hard, and he hoped every decision you made would reflect the values he spent his life teaching. The room felt frozen. Then I smiled. Not a triumphant smile. Not a bitter one. Simply a peaceful smile. That is all I wanted to say. Confusion spread across several faces. They expected drama, accusations, revelations. Instead, I handed the microphone back to the coordinator and stepped down from the stage. The applause began slowly. One table, then another, then another. Within seconds, the entire room was clapping. Not loudly, not wildly, respectfully, sincerely. I returned to my seat. David leaned toward me. Interesting choice. Truth does not always need volume. He smiled. Across the ballroom, Brittany remained motionless. For the first time since I had met her, she seemed unable to control the atmosphere around her. People were looking at her differently now. Not because I had accused her of anything. Because she knew. And somewhere deep down, she knew that I knew. A few minutes later, Ethan approached my table alone. His eyes were red. Not from tears. From realization. Mom, he said quietly. I looked up. Yes. He stood there for several seconds before speaking. I should have stopped it. The words hung between us. Simple. Honest. Painfully overdue. I nodded. Yes. You should have. He lowered his eyes. I am sorry. This time, the apology felt different. Not polished. Not strategic. Real. I placed a hand over his. Then make better choices tomorrow than you made today. He nodded slowly. Across the room, Brittany watched us. For once, she did not interrupt. She did not approach. She did not redirect the conversation. She simply stood there, isolated by the very distance she had spent years creating. Later that evening, I left the reception before most guests. The night air felt cool and peaceful. As I walked toward my car, I thought about the strange journey of the past few hours. I had arrived believing someone had reduced me to a joke. I left understanding something far more important. The object placed at that table had never truly represented me. It represented the value someone else assigned to me. And those are not the same thing. When I reached my car, I looked back at the glowing reception hall one final time. Then I smiled. Because in the end, the only thing discarded that night was an illusion. And sometimes losing an illusion is the first step toward getting your life back.